Hey folks, I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to wake you up. Because if an EMP strike hit America tonight, within 60 seconds, every light from New York to LA would vanish. 322 million cell phones would go dead. 250 million vehicles would stall out on the spot. Hospitals, air traffic control, water systems, all offline in the blink of an eye. Within 72 hours, grocery stores would be stripped bare. Within 2 weeks, cities would start burning. And within 12 months, according to the Congressional EMP Commission, up to 90% of Americans could be dead. This isn't science fiction. It's a mathematical certainty in a nation where everything, from your paycheck to your pacemaker, depends on electricity. One nuclear detonation at 250 miles above Kansas could blanket the entire continental U.S. in an electromagnetic wave so powerful it would fry the grid from coast to coast. And here's the terrifying part. Nations like China, Russia, and even North Korea already have these capabilities tested and ready. So while most Americans are scrolling TikTok, your entire modern life is hanging by a copper wire thinner than your pinky. When that wire burns out, we go from smartphones to stone tools overnight. No power, no food, no law. If that's not the start of a movie, that's the first minute of America's last normal day. 5. The collapse of law and order. When the badge loses its power. Listen closely, survival family, because this is where it gets dark. And I mean biblically dark. When an EMP wipes the grid, law enforcement isn't just crippled, it's paralyzed. Across America, there are roughly 700,000 sworn police officers. Sounds like a lot, right? But spread across a nation of 330 million people, that's one officer for every 470 citizens, and that's under perfect conditions. Now take away the radio networks, the 911 dispatch centers, the patrol cars that depend on electronic ignition systems, and the computerized databases that tell officers who's who, and that thin blue line evaporates like morning dew on asphalt. Within 48 hours, urban police departments will be operating on muscle memory alone. No backup, no command chain, just isolated men and women with handguns, maybe one spare magazine, and no clue what's happening 3 blocks over. The National Guard. You can forget it. Studies from the EMP Commission warn it could take 72 hours for even partial military mobilization, and by then, every major metro area will already be drowning in looting, fires, and panic. Think of it like this. In New York City, the average response time for a priority call is 10 minutes. After an EMP, that number becomes infinite. Every single call unanswered. The first wave of chaos isn't going to come from hardened criminals. It'll come from desperate, unarmed civilians realizing there's no one left to call. You'll see mobs swarming supermarkets, pharmacies, and gas stations, and by the time store shelves are stripped bare, organized gangs will move in. They'll set up local fiefdoms, block intersections, demand tolls, and claim protection zones. History gives us a preview. After Hurricane Katrina, it took just 2 days before armed looters and rogue militias took control of entire neighborhoods in New Orleans. And that was with the National Guard and FEMA eventually showing up. In an EMP scenario, there is no cavalry. Local sheriffs will bunker down to protect their own families, while correctional facilities, many relying on electronic locks, could experience mass prisoner releases when backup power fails. Imagine 2.3 million inmates suddenly free, many hardened and desperate, flooding into unprotected suburbs. Law doesn't just fade away, it implodes, replaced by survival of the fittest justice. The real question isn't whether chaos erupts, it's whether you've prepared to protect your own when it does. 4. The urban exodus. When 200 million Americans start moving. Now let's talk about something almost no one considers. What happens after the first week, when the food is gone and people realize the lights aren't coming back on? Roughly 80% of Americans live in urban or suburban areas. That's more than 260 million people suddenly trapped in concrete cages with no running water, no refrigeration, and no resupply. When desperation hits, the cities will start to empty. But here's the nightmare no one's ready for. The roads will already be dead. According to the Department of Transportation, 97% of vehicles on U.S. roads contain microprocessors vulnerable to EMP damage. That means tens of millions of dead cars clogging every major exit route out of metropolitan areas. You can't drive. You can barely walk out without stepping over wrecked vehicles and human chaos. The Golden Horde. That's what survival experts call it, will begin pouring out of cities like a tidal wave. Hungry, dehydrated, terrified, and angry. Picture 20 million people trying to flee Los Angeles, 8 million trying to escape New York all at once, on foot, with nothing but backpacks and desperation. The average American has less than 5 days' worth of food in their home, and less than 2 gallons of drinkable water. By day 6, hunger turns to violence, and within 2 weeks, disease follows. Historical modeling by the EMP Commission and DHS simulations suggest that by the end of the first month, urban mortality could exceed 60% due to starvation, exposure, and violence, before any organized aid could even theoretically arrive. The refugees who survive that first month won't look like neighbors. They'll look like zombies, malnourished, dehydrated, and unwilling to kill for a can of beans. Rural America, where food is grown, will become the new battleground. Farmers who've spent their lives feeding the nation will now find themselves defending their harvest with rifles instead of tractors. You'll see makeshift roadblocks on country highways, people armed with shotguns guarding bridges, and families camping along ditches because they ran out of strength before they ran out of road. Disease outbreaks, dysentery, cholera, typhus, will explode as millions drink from contaminated water sources. Within 60 days, the United States will experience the largest uncontrolled migration in human history, dwarfing even the Dust Bowl exodus of the 1930s. And there will be no Red Cross trucks waiting on the other side, no FEMA tents, just exhausted Americans learning the hardest way possible that civilization isn't a guarantee. It's a luxury built on a power, logistics, and law. And when those vanish, the survival map of this country gets redrawn overnight. 3. The collapse of the food chain, when the supermarket becomes a war zone. All right, survival family, let's dig into the gut punch that hits hardest after the lights go out. The total annihilation of America's food system. I'm not talking about a few empty shelves or rising prices. I'm talking about a full-blown coast-to-coast starvation event unlike anything this country has ever seen. The modern U.S. food supply is a marvel of efficiency, but that efficiency is also its death sentence. Every apple, every gallon of milk, every loaf of bread travels an average of 1,500 miles before it reaches your table, and every single mile of that journey depends on electricity, refrigeration units, computer-tracked shipping manifests, barcode scanners, and GPS-guided trucks. The moment an EMP strike takes down the grid, 90% of that supply chain flatlines instantly. According to the USDA and DHS logistics data, grocery stores carry 3 days of stock under perfect conditions. That's it. 3 days. After that, it's not a question of shortages. It's a question of survival. Distribution centers, which use automated sorting systems and refrigerated warehouses the size of small cities, will go dark within minutes. Forklifts stop moving, conveyor belts freeze mid-cycle, and tens of millions of pounds of food will rot before they can even be loaded onto trucks that no longer run. Now, let's talk about what that looks like on the ground. Within 48 hours of the EMP, you'll see lines forming outside grocery stores, not to buy food, but to fight for it. There will be no credit cards, no Apple Pay, no functioning registers. It'll be mob rule, first come, first grab. And when the shelves run out, the hunger panic begins. The National Institutes of Health estimates that a human body begins to suffer critical cognitive decline after 72 hours without adequate nutrition. That means, within 3 days, millions of people, including your neighbors, will start making irrational, dangerous decisions. They'll break into restaurants, warehouses, even each other's homes. Reports from past disasters like Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico showed that within 1 week of total supply interruption, thefts of food and fuel rose by over 400%. Now apply that to an entire continent. Rural areas might think they're safe, but here's the kicker. 95% of American farms depend on grid power for irrigation, feed systems, and processing. Diesel pumps won't run. Grain silos can't unload. Livestock operations lose automated ventilation and feeding systems within hours. Millions of chickens and pigs will die in their pens, and cattle herds will starve once feed delivery routes collapse. Food isn't just gone from the store. It's dead in the field. And here's something most people never realize. The U.S. government's emergency food reserves aren't what you think. FEMA's total disaster stockpile can only feed 2 million people for a week. 2 million out of 330 million. That's 0.6% of the population. The rest, on their own. In a matter of weeks, America will turn from the world's breadbasket into a nation of scavengers. Urban survivors will start raiding warehouses, then move outward, hitting farms, co-ops, and grain silos. Food becomes the new currency, and a single 50-pound sack of rice could be worth more than a gold bar. The unprepared will do anything to eat. And that's when you'll see the real unraveling. Forget zombie movies. This will be the United States of hunger, and it won't end quickly. Because even if the grid comes back online in months, restarting a dead food chain takes years. You can reboot an app in seconds, but you can't reboot a harvest. 2. The water crisis. When every drop becomes worth more than gold. Let me tell you something, survival family. When the power dies, it's not food that kills people first. It's water. America runs on over 160,000 public water systems, and every single one of them depends on electricity to pump, purify, and pressurize water to your faucet. Without that electrical heartbeat, the entire system goes dry in hours. According to EPA data, even a moderate-sized city like Cincinnati moves nearly 200 million gallons of water per day through electric pumps. Those pumps have no manual backup. When the grid collapses, they stop. Period. Within 24 hours of an EMP, pressure in municipal water lines drops to zero. Toilets can't flush. Faucets cough out the last trickle. Every high-rise apartment becomes a dehydrating tomb. And here's the brutal math. The average American uses between 80 to 100 gallons of water a day. But when you're in survival mode, you need just 1 gallon per person per day to stay alive. And even that's assuming cool temperatures and no physical exertion. The second those taps run dry, panic begins. People will sprint to supermarkets for bottled water, which, let's be honest, will vanish faster than toilet paper did in 2020. After that, they'll turn to rivers, ponds, and storm drains, not realizing that untreated surface water carries cholera, giardia, and E. coli in concentrations that can kill a child within days. Now, here's where things get horrifyingly real. America's water infrastructure isn't just fragile, it's toxic when abandoned. Chlorination and filtration systems will fail first, allowing bacteria to multiply in the very pipes people are drinking from. Without pressure, groundwater seeps backward into municipal lines, introducing fertilizer runoff, sewage, and even industrial waste into what was once clean tap water. The Centers for Disease Control estimates that in crisis zones without sanitation, waterborne illness can infect 60% of survivors within 2 weeks. In an EMP event, that number could triple. Wastewater systems also fail at the same time, meaning raw sewage begins backing up into basements, streets, and storm drains. Think that's exaggeration. In 2017, after Hurricane Harvey knocked out Houston's grid, dozens of neighborhoods literally filled with human waste when the lift stations failed. Multiply that by 300 million people and you're looking at a nationwide biological hazard. But here's the hidden killer most people never think about. Chemical contamination. Across America are over 20,000 industrial sites with massive chemical storage tanks. Everything from ammonia to benzene. Every one of those sites depends on pumps, containment systems, and monitoring sensors to prevent leaks. Without power, pressure builds, valves fail, and chemicals start bleeding into rivers and groundwater. During the 2003 Northeast blackout, which lasted less than 2 days, Ohio's EPA documented dozens of wastewater and chemical spills into the Great Lakes watershed. Now imagine that same scenario but nationwide and permanent. By week 2, your local river isn't just dirty, it's lethal. That's why preppers say, you can't store enough water, but you can store the tools to make water safe. Gravity-fed filters, bleach crystals, calcium hypochlorite, solar stills, these aren't luxuries, they're lifelines. But here's the hard truth. Most Americans won't even make it that far. Once dehydration sets in, you've got roughly 72 hours before the body begins irreversible failure. 3 days. That's all it takes. And by that point, people will drink anything. Stagnant puddles, roof runoff, toilet tanks, contaminated ditches. Water becomes the new social currency. Fights will break out over half-empty bottles. Armed gangs will control wells. Rivers will become killing grounds. And within a month, you'll see what the Department of Homeland Security calls hydrological collapse, a fancy term for something brutally simple, a nation dying of thirst. If you think this sounds far-fetched, consider this. Even during peacetime, 40% of America's rivers and lakes are already unsafe to swim in due to chemical and bacterial pollution. In a post-EMP world, there'll be death traps. The power doesn't just keep your lights on, it keeps your water alive. When it's gone, America turns into a desert with skyscrapers, and the survivors, they'll be the ones who understood one unshakable rule. He who controls the clean water controls life itself. 1. The die-off. When America's population collapses in real time. All right, survival family, this is where the nightmare becomes unrecognizable, the part no one in power ever wants to talk about. You've made it through the first days of silence, the first weeks of starvation, and the first month of lawless chaos. But now comes the long-term collapse, the die-off. The hard reality is that the modern American population simply cannot survive without electricity. The 2008 Congressional EMP Commission estimated that within 12 months of a nationwide grid-down event, up to 90% of Americans could be dead. That's not a typo. That's 297 million human beings gone. Not from the EMP blast itself, but from what follows: starvation, dehydration, exposure, violence, and disease. Think about that for a second. In less than a year, the most technologically advanced society on Earth would be reduced to 30 million scattered survivors living at a pre-industrial level. The U.S. would go from a superpower to a ghost nation. Cities like Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago wouldn't just be dark. They'd be graveyards. Entire skyscrapers turned into vertical tombs as people trapped without elevators, refrigeration, or running water slowly succumb. Now, most people assume help would come, that somewhere someone has a plan. But here's the shocking truth. FEMA, DHS, and even the Pentagon have repeatedly admitted in closed briefings that there is no national recovery plan for a total grid collapse. Replacing just one of the massive transformers that power interstate transmission lines takes 18 months under perfect conditions, and there are fewer than 100 spares in the entire country. We'd need thousands, and the factories that make them, mostly overseas, in countries that wouldn't exactly be rushing to ship parts to a collapsing America. Fuel production would remain offline for years, meaning generators, trucks, and even farming equipment would rust where they stand. Without refrigeration, every vaccine, every insulin vial, every life-saving medication spoils within days. Hospitals become morgues. Nursing homes become death traps. The elderly, the chronically ill infants, they're the first to go. By month 3, even the healthy start falling as malnutrition, infections, and exposure take their toll. By month 6, diseases we thought were wiped out, cholera, typhus, tuberculosis, come roaring back. No antibiotics, no sanitation, just infection and fever. But here's the part that few are ready to face: the social psychology of collapse. After an EMP, America's moral compass shatters. Sociologists who studied long-term blackouts like the 1977 New York event found that when darkness falls and order breaks, the average person's threshold for violence drops by over 70%. Multiply that by 330 million people, and you're looking at a behavioral apocalypse. Communities turn tribal. Families turn inward. The unprepared turn predatory. Trade becomes barter. A handful of bullets for a loaf of bread. In some regions, we'll see micro-governments form. Towns barricaded by locals running on wood stoves and well water, enforcing curfews with shotguns. In others, you'll see warlord zones, where armed gangs control neighborhoods and ration food in exchange for labor or loyalty. It's not a movie. It's the inevitable endpoint of dependency. A nation that forgot how to live without technology will die by its absence. And yet, here's the flicker of hope most people overlook. The survivors won't be the ones with the biggest arsenals or bunkers. They'll be the ones who adapted fast, who learned old-world skills, blacksmithing, herbal medicine, manual farming, and community defense, who printed their knowledge instead of storing it on dead hard drives, who planned water collection, local food production, and energy independence before the blast. America won't end in fire or mushroom clouds. It'll end in silence. But in that silence, a new generation could emerge, tougher, wiser, and finally free of the illusions that comfort made us invincible. That's why you're here watching this. Not because you're scared, but because you're awake. You understand that the time to prepare isn't someday, it's now. Because if an EMP ever hits this nation, the line between life and death will be drawn by one simple truth: those who prepared and those who didn't. Stay sharp, stay ready, and remember, the end of power doesn't have to mean the end of you. All right, folks, if you've made it this far, you already know what most Americans refuse to face. An EMP strike isn't some wild theory. It's a mathematical inevitability in a world built entirely on fragile circuits and in blind trust. The Pentagon knows it. The Department of Homeland Security knows it. Even the White House has been quietly funding EMP grid hardening projects since 2020, but only 6% of critical infrastructure is actually protected. That means 94% of this nation's lifelines, food, fuel, medicine, water, could vanish instantly. And when that happens, no one's coming to save you. Not FEMA, not the National Guard, not the government, because they'll be too busy trying to save themselves. So, let's make this real simple. If the lights went out tonight, could you feed your family for 90 days? Could you filter water, defend your home, and survive without your phone, your paycheck, or the system? If you hesitated even for a second, that's your wake-up call. The time to prepare isn't when CNN breaks the story. It's now. Harden your gear, stock your calories, print your knowledge, and build your tribe. Because, when the grid dies, community and preparation are the only currencies left. If this breakdown opened your eyes, hit that like button and share it. Not for the algorithm, but because someone you know still believes the grocery store will always be there. I've got a free downloadable EMP survival checklist in the description. Use it. And remember, the next disaster won't send a warning. It'll send silence. Stay sharp, stay humble, and stay human. Because when the lights go out across America, the real survivors will be the ones ready to light their own.